Buried in this cemetery are believed to be some of the victims of one of the world's dirty wars. People who disappeared after being officially detained by the authorities or by men who just came and took them in the night. Not all the graves are marked and visited, because the visitors themselves might then be marked and visited. The country is Algeria. These files on people who've disappeared are kept by a lawyer. He declined to be identified for fear of government retaliation. He deals each year with more than 100 cases of disappearance in which he says Algeria's security forces are implicated. The authorities have been accused of abuses including kidnapping, torture and murder. But most of the estimated 50,000 deaths in the past 4 years have been attributed to Muslim fundamentalists. A fundamentalist party had been set to win an election in 1992. So the government cancelled the ballot, violence erupted, and the security forces retaliated.
In the cases I had, 95% of the people I've seen in prison, they told me they had been tortured for days and days. A lot of clients, a lot of families that I have received in my office declared to me that their sons, brothers, they have been taken from home at night by security forces, or people declaring they are from the security forces, and they are found killed. So we could say there is what we call it extrajudiciary killing in this country.
The Islamic Salvation Front, or FIS, which would have won the election, has since been banned and has reacted violently, although other groups have been guilty of wider and worse atrocities. This was the result of one of 2 powerful car bombs that exploded in central Algiers one day in February, killing at least 17 people, injuring almost 90, and badly damaging the offices of several independent newspapers. Journalists are prime targets, along with teachers and non-Muslim clergy. While most Algerians are already staunch Muslims, militant fundamentalists have attacked the Christian clergy, recently murdering one of their strongest critics. Bishop Pierre Claveri of Oran, who was blown up with his driver in July. The bishop died just hours after welcoming to Algeria French Foreign Minister Hervé de Charette, who's seen here 2 days before the murder at a Group of 7 anti-terrorism summit in Paris. Charette's meeting with Claveri was probably the reason for the bishop's murder by the fundamentalists, who view the tacit support of France for the government as a big obstacle to their establishment of an Islamic state. Charette had called the summit a milestone in the international fight against terrorism. At Notre Dame d'Afrique in Algiers, pictures of French monks kidnapped and murdered by fundamentalists in May mark a milestone in the Islamic fight against a secular government. A lot of Christians no longer worship in public, or at least agree to be seen doing so, but the clergy, many of them foreigners, continue in spite of the risks.
Many others in Algerian society are threatened. We as a church wanted to be in solidarity with the Algerian people. Now we have reached a time of trial. We are being threatened in our position as a church, as others are being threatened because of their function. Of course, we hope, like all Algerian society, that we will soon be freed from the violence.
An end to the violence appears to be a dim prospect as long as there are Islamic fundamentalist strongholds known as hot zones where they can impose their will if necessary. Some people obey the militants for a safer life, but there seems no shortage of volunteers, while the government insists that armed groups receive little popular support. Even the very young are at risk. The fundamentalist armed Islamic group says all schools should be segregated. Anyone who doesn't comply is automatically under threat. Anyone who teaches or joins a mixed class of students is liable to be attacked.
In the area where I was working, which is Bashdara, a very hot area, Every day the pupils lived in fear because they heard shooting and they heard about girls and people who had their throats slit in front of the school near the bus stops. Everyone was shaken by it. There was a threat to teachers. The standard of education declined. In the last few years it has been very difficult to teach because the children are traumatized.
Algeria is the most dangerous country in the world for a journalist to work in. More than 60 have been killed since January 1992. Others are kidnapped, tortured, imprisoned, and their publications subjected to tight censorship. Most newspapers in Algiers have moved to a fortified compound to try to improve their security. Impartiality is no defense. Many journalists aren't willing to be identified for fear of the consequences. The papers are often shut down by the authorities, but in spite of the intimidation and attacks, most journalists remain defiant.
For me, it is a struggle. My country must have hope so that it can function normally again and develop. But at the moment it's in the balance. It is my duty to stay here. I have been threatened by the terrorists and imprisoned by the authorities, but I consider that it is my duty to continue the struggle.
The government has been meeting opposition parties to discuss a possible national conference, a constitutional referendum, and elections next year. But while dialogue continues, the people on the street suffer.
It's not a civilian war, it's a war against civilians. A journalist hasn't a Kalashnikov or a bazooka. For journalists, their guns is their pens.
FIS, the Islamic Salvation Front, said recently it will continue the armed struggle, but not what it called the blind violence of some extremists.
The Algerian people in the last 4 years are living real tragedy because they are frightened, and the hope of this nation and the ordinary people, it's become they just want to live.
But 50,000 have died. Algeria's war for independence from France 40 years ago was brutal and bloody. Many ordinary civilians died then too. And the battle for Algeria is still not over.